Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of the SkillShine25 podcast. My name is Lucas, a local high schooler, and I'm joined by my friend Veer. Today we're speaking with Mr. Chaz Fagan, an internationally recognized artist, painter, and sculptor. From painting official portraits of U.S. presidents to sculpting iconic monuments, his work blends fine art with American history. Mr. Fagan, thank you so much for being with us today. We'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm Chaz Fagan. Welcome.
For those unfamiliar, what does a typical day look like in the life of a professional sculptor and painter like yourself?
I try to start as early as I can. Realistically, with family schedules and things, it's about realistically 8 o'clock in the morning. But I start and come right in the studio and get to work, and then just work straight until end of day. There's no stopping. But I just jump from project to project, subject to subject, keep myself cruising all day long.
Wow. Your work spans everything from presidential sculptures to historical paintings. What first sparked your interest in art and history in particular?
Let's see. Well, art in general, I always had it. I always liked it. I always did it when I was a kid. I loved pencil. I always was a little kid drawing. I was the kid in the back of the classroom drawing caricatures of the teachers. I was that kid, and I loved it. History, I had the advantage of growing up. Part of my childhood was in Belgium until I was in 7th grade. And so, I was exposed to a lot of history every day there, growing up and seeing a lot of Europe just because everything's so close. My family would travel on weekends and things, see everything we could. And so I soaked it all up and loved it. It's also because of growing up abroad that I gained a huge appreciation for the United States and our story, and it is incredible relative to every other country. And I love that perspective, and it's truly just built in. So put those two together. It wasn't a direct path at all, but eventually I was able to mix where I could actually tell great American stories, history stories, teaching stories through painting and through sculpture.
Yeah, your environment definitely shapes your passion, I can imagine. So after some research, we've learned that you're completely self-taught, which is incredibly rare. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced learning art on your own?
I think it's just the obvious of just not knowing what I was doing. I still don't. I kind of like that though too. Art is always just a very personal thing, and so I like discovering it myself. And then my main education was going to museums and seeing the work that I liked. So I would just focus on things I liked and try to decipher them and figure them out. When I was a kid, it was Van Dyck. So if you think of the portrait artist Van Dyck, tons, thousands of portraits everywhere in museums and in big houses and things. You see portraits everywhere. But Van Dyck's portraits, when you look at those, you felt like you were seeing a person. That person was looking back at you from way back when, hundreds and hundreds of years away. But there they were, real as can be. I loved that magic when I was a kid, and I still do. So that, and then, basically just struggling to learn by doing. I just do that. In fact, like when I do watercolors, I'm doing them all backwards, but it's the way I like it. In oils, I discovered different techniques that I like that give freshness and vibrance, but that's only by accident. Flesh tones, I think there was a color I discovered because my cat, this has been when I was just starting out, I was cartooning at the time, doing political cartoons, so just starting to paint. And I walked back in our little apartment and I saw what looked like bloody footprints. And I couldn't believe it. But at that time I was struggling to figure out how to paint skin, flesh, liveliness, and I couldn't figure it out. But then there was this paint on the floor that looked just like blood. And I thought, well, there's got to be a link there. And it was the cat had jumped down off the windowsill into my pile of paints, punctured one of those tubes, and was walking around the house with it. So so there was an education. I learned that this particular red was the one to go for, that type of thing. So it's just random learning, but always learning.
Yeah, so the constant discovery of new things is definitely fueling your passion, it seems like.
Yes, always looking for new stuff, and there are ways of keeping it fresh though too, and that's by purposely trying not to remember what the techniques, methods were.
Huh.
And so you succeed with a great painting, and you're able to somehow solve all the problems, and you step away happy. And you'd think, I mean, most people would think you want to write down every step you did and everything, but the result is when you start up with a fresh painting, blank canvas, you got pencil on it, and you just got to make it look good again. It's challenge is fresh every time it's new, and so it's a question of kind of rediscovering, like purposely making yourself rediscover stuff.
Oh.
Keeps it fresh and fun, and I think more lively on the canvas too.
Yeah, it's almost like the ability of doing it on your own, figuring out the challenges, figuring out the nuances, and trying to create that difference almost creates a bigger sense of accomplishment once you reach that.
Wow.
Oh yeah, no, there's nothing better, but it's kind of a weird world, and that I will dive into something where there's clay or paint or something, and I'm in it and I'm enjoying it, and your mind just goes, and then you come to again, and you've got progress on your painting or sculpture, but 5 hours have gone by, and it's the nature of it, but it is really rewarding that way.
I can imagine. So how did a self-taught artist like you end up building your way up and sculpting presidents in the capital?
Non-linear. It was definitely not a direct path, not a planned path, nothing like that. For me, it was just a question of one foot in front of the other and trying to survive. So my academic degree was actually Soviet studies. So the 1980s is the Cold War. I grew up around diplomats and witnessing what they did, and realized that there's a true power in knowing what the other cultures are like, being able to talk to those cultures and be able to communicate so you can make something better for your country. And I thought for sure that's what I was going to aim for. And because it was the Cold War, I aimed for the Soviet stuff. So my degree was Soviet studies, studied Russian, was very serious, and then went to the Soviet Union after college and got a special certificate there at Leningrad State University. But at that short period of time, just 3.5 months of being there and experiencing the spectrum of experiences there that were not necessarily good, it completely changed my life. I came back and just dropped everything I had studied for all those years. And what I had been doing through college was political cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for the college paper in New Haven, and then I also did it for the city paper in New Haven. And the key there was on my very first day walking in, meeting that editor, I handed him these little black pen and ink cartoons, and he paid me. He actually wrote a nice check, and I thought, well, this is good.
This could go somewhere.
Yeah, I could do something. And it's that memory. So when I changed all my gears and tried to start from scratch from zero, my zero was cartooning, and I'll just do that. And so I went full speed into that and loved it. It went from there. I mean, it's so hard to describe it. It grew, took a little time. I got syndicated, so nationally syndicated. I never had a paper, never had a base paper, never had an editor. I just had a deadline. So I was just doing commentary and sending it out, and it would just get published around. It was great, but it didn't pay that great. And then responsibility starts to grow, and I got married, and things happen, and I needed to do more. So I just did more. All I could think of was just putting more lines in the water and see what pulls. And so it was every PR agency in Washington. I was living in Washington D.C. Every PR agency, ad agency I went to, pitching myself to do art. So when they couldn't find someone in New York to do it fast enough, I was the local guy that they could call. And it worked. And so I just did that, and suddenly was doing magazine illustrations and ad illustrations for Sunkist and Pizza Hut, stuff. Just newspaper, pen and ink. And then did landscapes and oils. I was doing a little bit of painting prompted by a random stranger. And then next time, I'm doing gallery work, paintings, and then portraits. It just grew and grew. To get to your answer about, a long answer, sorry, about presidents and that type of level was also just random, but through the magazine work. So I did a magazine cover, and it's one of those where I was at that point living in Philadelphia, and they'd call you, you get the assignment, you do a painting, and they would pick it up the next morning. So you'd have like an afternoon to do it, an evening or whatever to do a painting, bang it out, and then they pick it up and it was gone, and then they get published, and you'd forget about it. You'd go on to the next one. Well, one of those I did was of President Reagan, and I never paid attention when it hit the stands or anything, but it hit the stands, and then I got phone calls from his former staff members asking if I'd be willing to do a portrait of President Reagan. And,
Incredible.
in my background with Soviet stuff, he was a hero at that point. I'm like, what? But it meant doing his portrait, and that one hangs in New York City at the Union League Club. My very first kind of big opening. It all happened just because of doing a magazine assignment.
Wow.
And all it took was one person to see it, and everything changed from there.
Yeah, well, that's another step,
Well,
and then there are more steps and steps. It's
But it's just,
you never know where
yeah,
this
you
comes
never
from.
know where it's coming from and what'll happen, right? Like, when you were at that point with the magazines, did you ever even think about where you could go with that?
Oh,
Think
the
about
magazines?
where it would end up?
Oh, at that point, shoot, I remember people there trying to convince me for stability and predictability and things, because I've always been self-employed and just on my own. They were trying to convince me to come in as an art director, on the staff, and I never liked that idea. I never liked the idea of not doing my own stuff. So you never know. So there were paths that were possible, but I just never took those. And in terms of sculpture, the same thing, same randomness happened with a magazine illustration. It was a cartoon-like illustration of Alexis de Tocqueville. So he was the guy from France who came over to the U.S. Exactly.
Critiques America.
That's an amazing, amazing observation. He observed Americans as a unique culture, and that was in the 1830s, and it's real true to today. This mentality of just, we can do that. That just no other cultures have that. It's just built in somehow from being here. And he wrote a big book called Democracy in America, and at that point I did a cartoon of him in a magazine, and then I got a phone call from C-SPAN, the television network. They were going to be doing a 1.5-year program on Tocqueville, but they didn't have any illustrations. They couldn't have any visuals to use on TV. And so they asked if I'd come to DC and pitch to do a portrait maybe. And the quick version is I got the job to do the portrait, barely had time to celebrate when they changed everything. All decision makers were changed. So my contract was out, and I had to go back down to DC to pitch again. And I went, same stuff. I brought in portraits that I'd done, and kind of old-looking things and make it look like 1832. And then nothing happened. It was terrible. And it was before digital, so the last piece of paper I had in my portfolio was a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with pencil on it, and it was just another Tocqueville likeness I had done, a doodle. But instead of just finishing the head, I put in shoulders, and I just doodled, and instead of finishing with the shoulders, I put in a little base on it in pencil. And that's what they saw, and then everyone went nuts. And suddenly I was taken to this room, to that room, meeting these people, sign this, sign that, and I left and had the job to do a sculpture,
Wow.
but I'd never sculpted.
So did it feel like a leap of faith, like denying all of those staff director positions that you were offered and going your own going your own route by yourself? So was there any fear behind that?
Always, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm still self-employed, so every day is you have no idea what's coming around the next turn. But no, definitely. But in the end, though, I considered it, but it just wasn't right for me. At that moment, for sure, I still wanted to see what more I could do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't live behind the other side of fear. You gotta embrace it at some point if you want to get what you want. So that seems like exactly what you did, and you've succeeded.
Yeah, and it's all just, just being, willing to make the step and try something different.
For sure.
And I think that's the key.
That's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah. So the next question we have is, you've created works of everyone from Ronald Reagan to Mother Teresa. Is there a piece that felt especially personal or meaningful to you?
Great questions. Problem is I have a super hard time answering questions like that because really I just dive into each project individually, and I love it and try to really relate to each one. I mean, I have just greatest memories of different projects, all for different reasons. But yeah, so you mentioned Mother Teresa. That was, again, kind of accidental almost, where I had worked with a client to do a sculpture of Pope John Paul II. And while they were here visiting to see the model, the maquette, so they're in the studio and they're looking at the model and they see I had a painting up and I don't know who it was, or a portrait going. And with that, they then asked if I'd be willing to do a portrait too. And I said, well, sure, And it was Mother Teresa. I like this client, subject is great, Mother Teresa is a great character. I thought this would be great. And as I was going through it, they called me to ask for progress images. I never, ever show progress images to clients as I'm going along. It's because I know where it's going to go, but I can't tell them where it's going to go. So you don't just want to give that away. But eventually, this is a great client of mine, and they kept pushing and pushing, and so I gave in. And so I sent them an image of this painting that wasn't finished. And then responses came back. And there are all these little critiques but the weird thing is that the addresses that came back were email addresses I didn't know. And I didn't recognize, and I barely recognized where they could be from, what country or anything. And it turns out they were from the Vatican.
Oh,
wow.
And what I didn't know is that they had planned to move this along, and then if it went okay, present it as a possibility for the image of Mother Teresa for her canonization, so when she became a saint.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know. But when it happened, I obviously found out. I was talking to people who used to work with Mother Teresa and everything, and then eventually, with fairly short notice, went to Rome for the event. Complete, surprise. There was no planning in that by me at all. It's just, again, just doing an assignment, and you never know where it leads.
Wow, that is a really, really interesting story. I mean, you never know where these things are going to end up, right? That's like, it's pretty funny because the whole art of nature is that it goes with the flow. It's like a river, and almost your job has been the same as your passion, which is this art. All so natural, like a stream.
Yes, and it keeps moving. But the main thing, though, is that the work. So you want to. The only thing for sure, this gets back to your question about, the tie and emotional tie to each subject. You have to be completely in for each one to allow you to do the best work you can possibly do. Because it's only when you do that, then you can kind of set it free, and maybe that'll lead to something else. So you have to do your best work every day, and I'm sure writers go through the same thing. Anyone at a desk, I'm sure, and everything they produce every day. If you make sure that everything you do every day is the top possible thing you can do, things will happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that's why a lot of these books are here, so that you can gain a more emotional perspective or deeper understanding of these figures that you sculpt or paint.
So it feels less like you're just like painting on a canvas, and more like you really have an emotional connection to it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you understand the meaning and the story behind it.
And if they're individuals, if they're people, I want to know what they were like as best you can. You can't do that with some historical figures. There's only a limited amount of biography we know. Mm-hmm. But then you've got circumstances and situations and settings you can kind of infer. And I'm always trying to see that person in front of me when I'm sculpting and painting. And that is the method, is just visualizing them in front of you.
So, what is one sculpture or portrait that nearly didn't happen? Maybe it was something that went wrong behind the scenes, but in the end, it ended up teaching you a lot.
Okay, these are great and terrible, because I try not to dwell on these things. I mean, there are some events. Well, there have been some scary events, like a sculpture in Houston, where it was an 8-foot figure of Secretary Baker's. He was a Secretary of State, very big figure that the family is in Houston, and he was a close friend of President Bush Sr. And there are opposing monuments that I did in Houston across a river, so they face each other. But this particular design took some work. We actually got awards for the design and placing it and saving this park green space, etc. So that's all ancillary, but it was big at the moment, and I can remember the city not allowing us to bring in the sculpture because it would have meant closing off a street, and we couldn't do that until the middle of the night of this particular night, and the only night they would allow us was the night before the unveiling. The unveiling was going to be in the morning, like 10 or something, and then followed by a lunch that everyone would go to after that. So a big public thing, 10 in the morning of this particular day. Installation was the night before. And now it's the middle of the night, we've got the street closed, one crane truck, a crew that was supplied by the city to install it, and then one member of the architecture firm, I think. Yeah, he was there for sure. And we're putting it in, and the quick version of this is there were mistakes made that I didn't spot, or they reassured me that the particular grout they were using was not quick set, that it was actually the long set grout, which means if you can visualize big 8-foot tall sculpture, bronze, steel inside, it's got rods sticking out of the bottom, 4 of them, and they are going into a stone that's already designed to accept the shape. So it's this carved stone, etc. And we have the holes in, and they're already drilled. And now he's dropping this thing, he's lowering it off a crane, lowering this thing down, and the rods are going in, and then I'm waiting. We'd already done dry setting, all the testing, so everything worked out perfectly. Now we just had to put in that caulk, basically, or the epoxy, and then it would be done. And this is now like 1 in the morning or something. And they're lowering it down, and then it stops. And I look up, and the chain that's holding off the crane, this huge boom crane, and the chain's loose. But he's still like this far from the flush to the stones. There's a lot of threaded rod to go down in those holes still. Stuck. And at that point, I realized that they used the quickset epoxy. So they'd fill the holes with this stuff and then dropped it down, and by the time you lower that thing down,
It was already dry.
it was already setting, so it was already getting harder, and eventually it made so much resistance that it held the weight of the whole statue. Not all the way in, the holes. And at that, I mean, total panic. When I realized it, the crew realized it, and they disappeared into the night. Gone. And so with me was the representative from the architecture firm and the driver, the crane operator, and that's it. And we, at that point, the crane operator had some tools, thank goodness. We were able to cut those steel rods to free the statue and get him safely away. And now they're like 4 Excaliburs sitting out of that stone. And I mean, shiny, nice steel, threaded rods. But I was so mad. So I was holding these things and, just furious. But I realized there was movement. I was shaking these things, and I realized there was a little bit of movement. So it hadn't totally set yet.
Yeah.
And you couldn't pull them out, but maybe we could screw them out. So unwound them, cut my hands the whole way, but unwound those things. So the 4 of us or 3 of us went at it, pulled them all out. So now, at least, the rods are out. They're not going to be permanent. But now we had to figure out how to drill more holes because that stuff's going to set.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just use the holes again. And he has to be aimed the same way. So it meant re-drilling those holes and getting a diamond bit drill, a big one, in the middle of the night. Fortunately, the architect had a link to someone at Lowe's or something, and truly got a brand new one to drill for those hours it takes to drill, a core drill, a bigger hole to accept the rods. Whole thing, went through the whole process, got it done. By then I had just enough time to walk to my hotel, change clothes into a suit, come back, and be ready for the unveiling because it was only an hour away.
Wow.
And unveiling happened, everything went beautifully, and no one knew except for me. But the lesson of it was, other than just trying to cover every detail and make sure that you insist on every detail that you know is right, you got to hold your ground. I wish I'd done that at that through that night. But the other part is that finding a solution was I immediately called the foundry here in Charlotte, sort of in Seagrove. It's a foundry I've used for 20 years. It's obviously middle of the night, and I called Ed and asked him for his advice. He's got a great sense of what to do. He's like an engineer type brain, and I asked for what the solutions could be because we only have so many hours. And so the willingness to rely on other people when you need it, because I needed it. And then the other person I relied on completely was that architecture firm representative, which is kind of not a high-ranking person, but just there to be present. And they were the ones who were able to pull some strings and get the drill and get it all done. So without them, it would have never, ever happened. So the lesson for me was, at least in the sculpture world, you got to really rely on other people and know that you do.
Yeah, you got to trust people when times are tough. I mean, sometimes it's hard. I know a lot of people struggle with that, like putting their responsibility on another person's hands. So that's definitely a valuable lesson for everybody to learn at some point in their life.
Yeah, it's like faith. You got to have faith in other people and that they can help you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for teens who love art, storytelling, or even American history, what's your advice for turning that passion into a real career?
Oh, man. 'Cause I think there are bunches of careers that are possible. Beyond the art is a wonderful one. It's hard to channel that perfectly. I mean, even in the work I do, I don't always do historical figures and people and subjects. It's if they come along, I'm jumping, I'm going to try to do them. So it's those opportunities that you can't predict. But what I do is basically, and always have done, is basically like storytelling. So visual storytelling and knowing the stories and figuring out a way to relate them so people understand them. And that can be done in many different fields. Writing, what you guys are doing, podcasting, story writing, movies, documentaries. There are just so many ways. If you're interested in history, there are lots of ways of communicating that and making it exciting for people. And it all comes down basically to storytelling. So that, broadly, that's just what I'd recommend is, follow those interests and the really fascinating things you come across, and then see how you can communicate it, whether it's painting, sculpting, cartoons, whatever it is. But there are ways of doing it that'll make you happy, and if you're happy doing the work, you're going to find it.
You've worked at the intersection of art and politics. What's it like balancing creative freedom with public expectations?
It's basically the same as dealing with any client. When you have the client, whether it's a big committee or a big company or a city or an individual, the number of people on the other side of that table, or just the single person, you're trying to communicate your stuff, do your artwork, while keeping them on mission too. Because they're the ones who are financing it, they're the ones who are placing it in front of their building or in their park, or they have a mission that they have to accomplish. And you got to make sure that you can help them along the way while staying true to the story, true to the history, and true to your art, to make it worthwhile. So it's a great symbiosis. When it comes to politics, I haven't really had anything beyond just that basic notion of client and mission. So no, I haven't had to do any maneuvering or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just a question of producing a piece of art that's then appreciated.
I mean, have there ever been any issues with communication between you and the client? Like, have you ever learned from a client not giving some clear direction on what they actually want or what they?
Well, that's built in.
Vision.
Yeah, because I mean, just like me, if I can't tell you what art I'm going to like, or what story I'm going to like, or what movie I'm going to like until you see it. You need something to see. And I can sit in front of a client or a committee or something and describe things, but in the end, you got to show them something. And it's that showing them something that starts the discussion going. And so when you know that there's confusion on something, some element, some purpose, where people want a lot in a sculpture, for example, they want to pile in illustration of a scene type thing, but does it help tell the whole story? Sometimes it's just too much and people get overwhelmed visually. So my goal is to try to guide them that way, and the only way to do that is to show examples and to present them with different possibilities, all that I think are acceptable, but they're variations of their theme, and see where it goes. But it's that creative process. It's a collaboration that happens at the beginning, where you're trying to come up with the solution for them that would work, and it also stays true.
Yeah, one side can't outweigh the other.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I have to realize, and it's obvious that the project wouldn't happen without the committee, the city, the company, the person, whatever it is at that moment. They're making it happen. They're generating it, and so there's definitely a need to make sure that relationship stays true, and that the purpose of it is agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty clear that great attention to detail is a value of yours when it comes to making art. So because of that, how long would you say it typically takes to complete a large-scale sculpture like the ones that were in Houston?
Yeah, they do take a long time. I mean, a larger sculpture will take about a year.
Wow.
And that's fast, because the process is so spread out, and then the actual casting. So the old lost wax method of casting bronze is the same method that's been used for literally thousands of years. There's nothing has changed except the initial mold that I do, because my clay doesn't dry, is with rubber. So we do that initial mold taking is with rubber. It's modern, but other than that, everything else is the same traditional method. But I mean, by the time I give the okay to the finished clay of a big 8-foot sculpture out at the foundry, they will then need at least 4 or 5 months minimum to be able to produce a cast.
Wow.
And a lot of skill and very specific knowledge along the way. That's incredible on their end, which I get to participate in too. So it's highly involved. It takes a lot, but yeah. So a year is actually kind of fast. Some have taken a lot longer.
So it's kind of a team effort a little bit throughout the process.
Yeah. So when it comes to casting the bronze, there's a lot of team effort, and the catch is, the reality is that I learned early on is that the process seems precise, but there's so many variables along the way that imagine you've got an 8-foot sculpture, and it's a person standing, and that you can feel the gravity, they can feel the weight in their feet. It feels good when it's in clay, and I think I'm done. Well, now if you cast that in multiple pieces, because you have to cast multiple pieces so the foundry can pour these pieces that are manageable. You can't have huge ones, or it's not manageable and it's dangerous. So they have it. The biggest bucket of metal that they use is what's manageable by 2 people. So if something happens, the winch breaks, something else breaks, you still got the 2 people can manage to contain that bucket of liquid metal, which is dangerous stuff. So you're limited in how much you can pour in a piece, a portion. So now you've got all these pieces, and you got to piece it all together. But the pieces, the castings are, the shrinking is different based on the humidity, temperature. So from like, you could be pouring all day long, but throughout the day the temperature could change, humidity will change. Now your pieces that are perfect pieces, they look like they should go together. One is physically bigger than the other one. And so they won't quite fit together. But it sounds okay, but they match, you can put it together. But I imagine if you have an 8-foot tall statue and somewhere at their knee or shin or thigh or something is a piece that's just, 1/8, quarter of an inch off, that'll shift the pose completely. And so you can walk in to see a finished piece of metal and think it looks accurate, but it doesn't feel accurate. And it's all because these tiny little changes that happen along the way in the process. And the collaboration comes in where they're willing to put up with me, where we're twisting and moving it, tweaking it, shifting stuff under the feet to give a little more balance or strength to the stance, just because you're making up for all the little mistakes that happen along the way by the nature of the beast.
Well, for a lot of kids today, they think that their profession will all work out once they just get to that place of good college, good professional degree. But you obviously created a whole different path for yourself outside of that educational career. What is some advice you would give to these high schoolers today, or kids in general that want to have a passion and a career that are mutually beneficial to each other?
I think it really gets back to what we were talking about before, is no matter what it is, that your work product, what you're putting out, has to be the absolute best you could possibly do. Because if you do that, then you can create a path almost for yourself. You don't know where it's going to go, because that gets directed by whatever job is in front of you, or opportunity happens and you get a job with this company. But if your work product, what you do every day is commendable, is the top, then you will have choices. You will be able to move and take your career along. The idea of being specific to a direction, it's hard to think of doing that. I in my mind, I never really did that. I broadly did it with art, but the whole category of art. So everything, and illustration was considered a lesser art when I was growing up. Why would you do that? That's not fine art. When for me it was just art. But it also meant the reality is of putting those multiple lines in the water. So you've got little things going that you're cooking, and maybe something will catch. So the method for survival for me was definitely doing all kinds of different things, because inevitably one would be hot and the others wouldn't, and then one would be hot and then they'd fall again. So you'd have something that'll keep you going and driving.
Keep adjusting, especially in a changing world.
Trial and error.
Yeah.
Just got to keep trying and see what works out for you.
But it's not just single path at a time. It's like imagine straddling different paths at the same time, because one gets really solid and really good, and you're like, oh, let's do that.
Yeah, you throw.
But it's just it's kind of keeping your mind and your abilities open to the random stuff, to the instead of a door opening, there's a window that opens, and you just think, well, maybe I should try that. But it's a question of keeping yourself open to the idea of multiple directions, not just a single one. I love the idea of a single target, because I'm that way, really. For a while there, I was aiming for children's books for sure. Pushed super hard, loved it, loved the whole process, everything. Got lucky, didn't get published, but got lucky, a little bit. I had a little taste of it, but in the end, it didn't work. But while doing that, I was also doing all these other things. So I just kept moving no matter what was happening.
Mm-hmm. You throw 100 darts at a board, and there's a better chance one will hit. And I'm guessing that's a little similar to this next question, but if you could give advice to your younger self as you started your first major sculpture project, what would you say?
I don't know. I wish I'd been better at that time. I think no. I wish I'd been able to reach out to more people doing what I liked. And I did that a lot, but I think it would have been so beneficial to have more of that feedback from people who are doing what I wanted to be doing. Where I reached out to a cartoonist in DC who was a Pulitzer Prize winner multiple times, Jeff McNelly, and I just called him up out of the blue right after college, right after I got back from the Soviet Union, and sought his help. And he just opened my eyes. Didn't open any doors for me. He just greeted me. We met him in DC, and we talked about the possibilities, and I saw where he was, and that was just wildly inspiring. He was top of the world and doing great. So that type of reaching out to people, I think I got lucky. I think my very first big sculpture, big one was President Bush in Houston. That was kind of the big break for sculpture, and I got lucky in that there was another sculptor who happened to be working right there in the foundry, so visiting kind of, and I tapped into him for every little detail I could think of. But having him there to kind of show me what he does, I didn't do everything he did, but it was so inspiring. So I think I wish I could have done a lot more of that. And now a lot of those people are gone, the people I truly admired. And Jeff McNelly died too young, and I really, really wish I'd done a lot more of that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
You've created public art that's been seen by millions globally. How do you stay grounded as an artist when your audience is quite literally the entire world?
All right, well, I never think of that. That's how. Never think of that, the scope and the breadth of audience or anything. It's really just focusing on the piece. Really try not to get distracted by that.
Mm-hmm. Because that's not what it's about. It's about the message.
You can't get wound up in your audience because then you start to fray away from yourself and what you want and what you expect from yourself.
But also, it's I've mentioned it before. I use the word multiple times as surprise. It's the bonus surprise that comes from doing a piece. So it's the gratitude that becomes built in because you don't expect anything like that. But if you do a good job, maybe there'll be a response. And so it's definitely nothing I ever dwell on, ever.
So, like you've said, you've really jumped from all different parts of art, from 2D cartoons to hyper-realistic sculptures. Going into the future, as, again, society changes once again, how do you think your art is going to change and evolve to fit the new standards of society?
Yeah, that's a difficult question nowadays, too, because obviously the AI introduction where you can just do a little word command and poof, stuff happens. That entire juxtaposition of created art versus just art that's made, as in pops out of your computer, is going to be a big discussion, I think, because the human side is the one that actually creates it, and AI is just based on all the accumulated creations of humanity, of history. And what's this is kind of broadly concerning for me is AI has been able to go from this to just full speed, right? And that's because it has had exposure to all of the knowledge that we've gathered for humanity, you know. So all of, in art-wise, all through the Renaissance, the Impressionists, all these great trends we saw through history, the AI has been able to soak that up and use it now as an image tool. And what happens from now into the future, because if people are either using more of that AI to create their art, or there's just not much art being made and it's just AI created art, well then it becomes like there's got to be a term for it, but it's like this gradual nullification of creativity. As AI studies itself and its own products, the breadth of that creativity diminishes to only the language that it's used to and has on hand. If we don't feed it with more creativity, then it'll just kind of turn on itself. So maybe that right now is the max that you're going to get of creativity out of AI, because it's all of human history is piled in right now. And then where's it going to go?
Yeah, I mean, one of our earlier interviews, Mr. Korczynski, he said he's an architect for GM, and he told us that AI right now is not necessarily artificial intelligence. It's more of large language models that are just, in a way, a more complex form of Google, where it's just a bunch of information that it's compiling together, and it's searching, and it's just trying to create these new things, but it's not necessarily learning on its own yet. It's not at that point where
it's not its own mind.
Yeah, it's not its own mind.
Everybody else's.
It's not growing yet, and that's kind of what you're saying right now.
Yeah, it's just it's growing based on all the knowledge it's had before. But if you don't feed the new knowledge, if you don't create the new stuff for the next generations, and you just lean back and rely on other stuff for creativity, then that language, that amount of information that AI will be able to gather and work from will be diminished. So you have this kind of diminishing return type thing. It's kind of a quandary.
Mm.
But where it goes, I am, as always, determined just to keep plugging. And in my own life history, there was an element of this that happened right after college. So I was doing cartoons and trying to make a living with more. And computer illustration was everything at the time. But it was really rudimentary, early computer illustration. But everyone was doing it. And that's what people wanted. So every ad agency, they wanted this computer slick look. But it was so kind of rudimentary. And in my case, I didn't want to go that way. I had done a little of that to make money in college too, illustrating tests for textbook companies and things. Just not good. But the result is that what I ended up doing was offering a type of work that was no longer done. So my work was old quill pen ink. So pen and ink with a quill pen, so nibs, these old nibs and things, and into ink that no one had seen in a long time. I did scratch board, which is like a board that's painted with white clay, and then you put black over top and you scratch away to reveal the white. You can do layers of that and do really almost photographic things that are like two-dimensional carving. And that used to be done for magazine illustrations early on. And I did that. I did, instead of flashy colors, I did very single old colors, just like they did in the earliest publications, because it was so hard to get different colors in publications. So my point is, I offered up the old-looking stuff, and it was suddenly brand new. People just hadn't seen that at all. And it wasn't that I invented it, I just kind of revived it and used the old lines and techniques. And that helped me along. So maybe there's you're talking about the future artists and people trying to do something different. Maybe there's a way to, hold on to some old method of doing something and it'll become new again.
History repeats itself.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we're going to end this episode. Mr. Fagan, thanks again. Do you have any closing words?
Oh, this is great. You guys are doing a great job. Your questions are maybe too hard for me. That was really well done.
Thanks.
So thank you. I always kind of struggle when it comes to introspection and things. So,
No, it was
so you guys did a
perfect.
tremendous job. Congratulations.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
And thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely.
It's great meeting you. Mr. Chase Fagan, guys,